Welcome to the Arizona Sunset Podcast. My name is Audra Owens, and my goal with this podcast is to help others better understand the issues that come up with aging loved ones. We are located in the Phoenix, Arizona area, specifically in the East Valley, and many of our guests and resources will be relative to this area. For my first guest, I went with an easy one. Audra Owens is the owner of the Arizona Sunset Assisted Living Facility in Queen Creek, Arizona. Hello, Audra.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
So Audra and I are married, full disclosure here. She was good enough and kind enough to be the first guest on this podcast. Hopefully we have many more. So before we get started with your new facility, Audra, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a native of Arizona, lived here my entire life, and for that matter, so has my husband, Justin, our host. And we've lived in the East Valley. We've done a lot of different things, but this assisted living home is something that we were nervous about even considering at first, but the more that we thought about it and learned about it and considered how we could incorporate it as an important part of our family, it became an idea that we felt was really right for us and a way that we could really contribute to shaping our children as well as helping others.
And what life experiences do you bring that you think will help with running an assisted living facility, whether it be through education or training or opportunities that you've had to interact with people or serve in the past?
There's a few things. I was raised by older parents, which might seem like a silly thing, but my parents at this point are elderly. They're 86 and 78, and knowing some of the problems that they face and some of the thoughts that they have about assisted living, whether those be positive or negative, they really helped me in shaping what kind of home I wanted to have, because for people of that age group, for a lot of them, it's looked down upon. They would never want to be in an assisted living home. They want to die in their own home. And so I've really thought about what we can do to make it a more pleasant place to be. And it doesn't seem like such a defeating thing to do to decide to live in an assisted living home. Other experiences, my background, my education, I have a master's in counseling, and my background was in adoption. And in the 5 years that I worked as an adoption caseworker, a lot of the work that I did was with families that were in crisis, or with women who were in crisis, or bringing families together and helping them through highly emotional situations and being able to turn something that is scary into something that can be really meaningful. And with the people that I worked with, helping them feel like they have a voice and they have somebody who is going to be their ally and be somebody that's in their corner. And I think that as that translates to assisted living, depending on the resident, if you have a resident that has dementia, that is somewhat of a crisis, can be somewhat of a crisis to them when they move into your home, because it can be very scary. It can be very upsetting. They have to really get reoriented to where they are and who they're with. And having experience in being able to help people feel safe and feel like they have somebody that's watching out for them and somebody that's going to make them feel safe. I think that it's the work there easily transfers over, and helping to make the families feel comfortable with what is happening with their loved one. And then also having experience with the life spectrum, I guess. With adoption, we're dealing with the birth end of life. And with assisted living, we are dealing with the end of life, or nearing the end of life. And both sides of that spectrum, both ends of that spectrum are really sacred and really precious and beautiful in their own way.
Great. That was a lot of good information. Just so that I'm clear, One thing I've noticed a lot out here, at least in the East Valley and Chandler and Gilbert, they're building out a lot of big facilities for seniors, for senior care. What is the difference between those large communities, the big, I don't want to say big box, but you know what I'm talking about, like the big apartment style or the big, they look like hospitals, they look like apartments, versus an assisted living facility, which I haven't seen. You don't see those being built. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the big, as you called it, the big box facilities, they typically can have more of a range of care. So they typically will have a wing for supervised care, people that aren't needing a lot of one-on-one, and it'll go all the way to skilled nursing, which might be people who are bedbound and unable to do anything for themselves. They have a large staff. They typically have, everybody on staff that you could imagine, between nurses and social workers, and they've got, plenty of CNAs and staff. Because of their size, they might have, a wide range of activities and services. And the difference between those and smaller residential assisted living homes, the first thing is going to be numbers. Those bigger facilities might hold anywhere from 80 to 400 people. And residential homes are typically going to be licensed for 5 or up to 10 people. And so the feeling is just a little bit different. There's pros and cons to both. Typically, residential assisted living homes might be a little bit cheaper, cheaper overall, whereas the larger ones, they sometimes can start cheaper for supervisory care for people that don't need a lot of one-on-one. But the pricing goes up quite a bit as their level of care requirements go up. So you might see something starting at $2,500 for supervisory care. That's somebody that can pretty much take care of themselves, and then go up anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 a month for somebody that needs complete care and can't do anything for themselves. And typically in the residential assisted living homes, you might start slightly higher than that $2,500 or somewhere near there, especially if it's a semi-private room. And while you can expect your cost to go up with your level of care, it typically will not go up to anywhere near what the skilled nursing facilities will charge. There's also more of a home environment. Typically, if it's a good home, it's going to feel more like a home versus an apartment complex.
And is that why at least I haven't noticed them, is because they're in a home. So you probably wouldn't even know that it was there unless you saw it on Google or something?
Yeah, these homes, you typically can't tell what they are from the outside because they just look like homes. They might not even have much more traffic than a typical home that isn't an assisted living home. So from the outside, you might just notice that there's a ramp at the door, and that's about it. But, they have their assisted living homes also have activities, and it depends on feel. If you want to have a huge variety of activities and always have lots of people around, that's, the big places, versus an assisted living home, you probably are only dealing with 1 or 2, maybe 3 caregivers, because you've got your weekend relief and people that relieve the daytime caregivers when they need time off. But the people that you work with that are taking care of you are probably going to be much more steady, hopefully. And it's just more of the residents are probably a little bit closer, like family. And I think for the families themselves, when they come to visit their loved ones there, it might feel a little bit more personal and comfortable because it is a home environment. That's just what home does. It makes you feel comfortable.
Okay, great. And you mentioned caregivers. That's the people who are in the homes taking care of the loved ones that are placed in these homes?
Mm-hmm. So typically, you're either going to be dealing with CNAs or caregivers. CNAs are typically what they have at the larger facilities, because CNAs can take care of activities of daily living for residents, but they are not allowed to help with medications, whereas caregivers have the extra training and hours to be able to help dispense medications, and that's pretty much the only difference between the two. So the assisted living homes, because they overall have a much smaller staff, they will normally have caregivers rather than CNAs, so that they don't have to have the nurse there to dispense the medications daily.
And what do you look for when you hire a caregiver? Do you hire them, or do you have someone else? How does that work? I mean, I imagine ultimately a family is going to be one of their biggest concerns are going to be, who is the person in the home taking care of my loved one? So what types of things do you look for when determining who's going to be working in the home with your residents?
Well, yes, I hire them myself, just because, when you run your own residential assisted living home, it's very personal to you, and you want good customer feedback, good feedback from the family. The last thing you want is a caregiver who is not kind to your residents, who does not convey love or any kind of affection to your residents. I don't like the idea at all of having people work for me that make my residents feel unwanted or uncomfortable, or that it's a burden to help them when they need help. And so it's really important to me to hire my own caregivers, because I need to get a sense of how personable they are. I need to talk to their references to see what kind of experience they have and if their previous employers recommend them. And I also like to get to know them outside of caregiving. I like to know what their hobbies are, who they are, what kind of person they are outside of their caregiving job, because caregivers, there's a lot of them, and it's a pretty low paying field. Unfortunately, it's basically entry level pay for caregiving, and so to find a great caregiver, you have to offer more, and that's not a bad thing, because a good caregiver is worth it. They're worth paying more, because they're kind of a diamond in the rough among caregivers, because it is entry level. So when you can find a good one that makes your residents feel loved and safe, it's worth every bit to pay them more than what the going rate would be.
It sounds like picking the right caregiver is pretty important. Where would you rank it on priorities as far as running a care home?
It would be in the top 2, probably. I think, the condition of the home would probably be number 1, because the home has to be conducive to offering that type of care. In my personal opinion, the home needs to be light and bright and comfortable and cozy and warm, and it needs to feel like home. So I think I'd probably place that first, and then your caregiver is second, because you want top quality caregivers.
One of the things that you mentioned on your intro was your time that you spent as an adoption caseworker, and knowing some of that history and how special those experiences were to you, I wanted to see if you could relate that to some of the more recent experiences that you've had owning an assisted living facility.
Well, one of the things I want to bring back in from the adoption perspective is my goal and my priority when I worked with birth parents and the birth family was to help them make a very oftentimes devastating transition, which, when any mother has to place her baby with somebody other than herself, there's a lot of grief involved, there's guilt, there's just a lot of emotion there. And for the adoptive family side, it's a transition of just complete joy. But my goal was always to make the side of the birth parents, as, even though it was such a devastating thing so often, that transition, to make it as meaningful and comforting as possible, and help them feel supported through it all and help them feel loved. And that transition is not too different from the transition to, assisted living. It's not always comfortable.